Some background noise. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and call this work session to order on filling the mayoral vacancy. Let's go ahead and start with a roll call, please. If we can start with a roll call. Oh. Barbara, if you can repeat yourself, please.
Felix Rivera.
Present.
Austin Quinn Davidson. Jamie Allard.
Here.
Christopher Constant.
Here.
Boris Dunbar. Crystal Kennedy. Suzanne LaFrance.
Here.
Cameron Perez Verdilla.
Here.
Pete Peterson.
Present.
John Weddleton.
Here.
Meg Zalatel.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. So as usual, if members want to get in the queue, please put yourself in the chat, or if you can't access the chat, please text me. Okay, so for today's work session, we're going to start with a brief presentation from Mr. Gates to review the options that we have. And then we're going to move on to a presentation from the clerk to basically paint a picture for what a special election might look like so that we're all on the same page. And then we'll move on to discussion. I do want to try to see if we can get through these first two parts as quickly as we can so that we can save as much time as possible for discussion. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Gates.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And with that little pressure to be as quick as possible, I'm going to pull up on screen the question and short answer in memorandum that Mr. Politoni and I distributed last week. So with this mayoral vacancy, we need to comply with the law. The charter lays out what the legal requirements are. In our memorandum, spelled out 3 options that would comply with those legal requirements. So, and I'm not going to go in order here with the short answer. I'm going to first say we can proceed with the assembly requiring no additional action from the assembly and have the regular election April 6th. With that regular election that's already being planned for electing a new mayor, and that new mayor-elect taking the office on July 1st, as is provided in code for that transitional period. And that would mean that the acting mayor continues to serve until June 30th. And the actual language is, or as soon as practicable thereafter. So we've had an instance where the mayor-elect was out of state and didn't arrive until July 2nd. So anyway, as soon as practicable after July 1st. So that's option 1, not requiring any additional action from the body. So option 2 is having a special election, calling a special election, and that's number 1 in the memo. And that requires a resolution from the assembly to call the special election, the election date, and establishing a few other dates. And we would have that drafted if a member of the body requests it to be proposed. And the third option is to have the regular election, the vacancy filled by the regular election, I don't know about that split between, but April 6th. But having the mayor-elect take office sooner than April 6th, and sooner is not determined because it requires the code change that would allow a mayor-elect to take office before the June 30th date that's in code. So we would need to amend that code section 32030A to allow mayor-elect to take office sooner if they're current mayor's seat is vacant if it's actually being filled by the acting mayor at the time. A code change like that could say upon certification of the election, which is 2 weeks after the election, usually, or it could be 30 days after certification of the election to allow for a transitional period from the acting mayor to the mayor-elect. So that's just depends on what's proposed by an ordinance for a code change. So those are the three options in short, and I guess that maybe was not as quick as possible, but I hope it's quick enough.
Appreciate that overview, Mr. Gates. So I'll turn it over now to the clerk. If you're speaking, Barbara, we can't hear you.
Okay, thank you. I have 3 slides today to show you. The first one here is for the cost of a special election. The next 2 slides will talk about the timeline for a special and the regular elections. As you can see, special is estimated at about 350,000 and the runoff is estimated about 323,000. And let me go to my next slide. So this is the slide where we're talking about and I realize this is probably a little bit hard to read, but I hope you can see that we've got what would happen with a special election in the top row. And then we'd have info if a special runoff was required in the second row. And then the regular election, which is currently scheduled, and then a regular runoff if that was required. So if the assembly had a special election, as the municipal attorney and assembly council advised you, they suggested doing it as early as possible after 90 days or after the vacancy. And I believe that the date that was determined was January 21st. I may be off a day on that, but that would be 90 days. The first Tuesday after that 90 days is January 26th. And that would be our recommendation for the day for the special election if you choose that option. If that's the day that you choose, you can see that the deadline for ballots to be mailed would be January 5th. There's the deadline to register to vote. The notice of vacancy would need to be published as early as December 3rd. And then the filing for office, you can see, is open from December 8th through December 15th. The public session of canvass for the special election, we would normally, that's scheduled 10 days after the election, which would be February 5th. It could be scheduled earlier than that. And that would be up to the assembly. The same with assembly certification. If it follows the public session of canvass, if the public session of canvass was moved earlier, we could move certification earlier. As you can see in the second line, if a runoff is required, and I'm sure that you all probably remember that a runoff would be required. And I'm just going to make sure that I'm quoting this correctly. A runoff is required if no candidate receives more than 45% of the votes. The charter says a runoff election will be held within 3 weeks of certification. And so we have listed you'll see the next page, which I will go to. You can see the deadline to mail ballots So you can see that we would propose the runoff election on March 3rd. And then, as you noticed in the previous slide, the deadline to mail ballots is only 7 days before the runoff election. We think we could do that earlier than that. I'm going to go back to that slide so you can see that. It's only 1 week before, but if the assembly certifies on the 9th, we could possibly do it. And if we were prepared, we could do it either the following week or possibly even the day after certification. That would be a good goal. So then the public session of canvass for the special runoff would be proposed again 10 days after the election on March 12th. We could do that earlier. The code says it needs to be done within 3 weeks of the election, or maybe it's the third Friday. I'm sorry, I've forgotten that exact code section, but we could do that possibly a week earlier. And the same with the assembly certification of the special runoff. So then we're on to the regular election. That's the third row. I think you all know that those dates are pretty standard. And then in the last column here, last row, we talk about what a regular runoff would look like and what those dates are proposed. And I think the code sections are the same as the one I referred to for the special runoff. So that's it for my presentation, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you so much, Madam Clerk. Great. So with that, that completes our presentation. So we will move on to discussion. Do we have any questions or discussion? Not seeing anyone in the queue right now. Mr. Weddleton.
Thanks. So a little unclear. What I see is the special election certification could potentially be March 16th. And the deadline to mail ballots in the regular election is 3/15. So it sounds like people would have their ballots for the regular election. Would that overlap with people mailing in ballots for the special election?
No, Mr. Weddleton, because the ballots for the runoff, the special runoff election, would be required to be postmarked by March 2nd. And then we would finish processing those and certify that election on March 16th. But the ballots for the regular election would be mailed on they're different ballots, so they wouldn't be the same.
But when would people start getting their ballots for the regular election?
March 15th or 16th. We mail on March 15th.
Oh, deadline to mail is for us to mail. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought that was for
I'm sorry.
voters. Okay, so likely scenario is a special election would have all of the current candidates for mayor, which is quite a number, and then the regular election would have all of them again. So they probably look fairly similar, except I guess the regular election one would be more than just, it would have bond measures and stuff like that then. Okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions. I guess the first one probably goes to Mr. Gates. And I guess I need to ask if the interpretation by legal in terms of giving us three choices and what I'm reading in code in terms of a requirement of a special election, I guess I'm still trying to reconcile that. How is it that there's a requirement to hold a special election, but in your interpretation, there's not a requirement. So I guess I just need maybe a little bit more about how that has come to be.
Yes, and I will try to answer, but of course invite, I think, Ms. Vogel's with us to add if she can. I'm going to pull up the memo again because it quotes the charter provision that's applicable, 702C, and this language requires that a vacancy in the office of mayor can only be filled by a regular or special election. So we have to have one or the other. So there's no appointment to the mayor, although it does say the chair serves as acting mayor, which isn't the same as the mayor, okay? But to fill it, we have to hold either a special election or it can be filled at the regular election. So the term ends of the current mayor with, I guess, the this upcoming regular election and taking office July 1. And so the vacancy of the mayor would be filled by that natural course if we stay with the regular election date. But we are able to, according to the charter, have a special election, and because there's time to do it, and not less than 90 days, as Ms. Jones pointed out on the calendaring. So we could have a special election, we could have a regular election. There's no other options for filling this vacancy, though.
I see. So
does that help?
Yes. So the distinction that I think I just heard is that we're not filling the mayor position because it's different. We are putting a temporary position in place, and you can't fill the mayor position without a special or regular election. So that's the distinction in the language. Is that correct?
I'm not sure what you're referring to as a temporary position. Do you mean acting mayor or being temporary?
So I guess what I'm saying is that the interpretation that I've been hearing from the public,
acting mayor?
The interpretation I've been hearing from the public is that we in order to we have to fill that position either by an election, a regular or special election, and so there's no other way to fill that position. But by putting an assembly member into there as temporary, we're not filling that position. We're putting somebody in temporarily. So I guess that's where I'm seeing, if that makes sense. That's the distinction, I think.
Yes, I think the charter requires the chair of the assembly to step in as acting mayor until the vacancy is filled. So it's sort of very nuanced use of the terminology there. The vacancy isn't filled by having an acting mayor. You still have to have an election. If the assembly calls a special election and someone's elected, that person fills the balance of the term, and that term ends June 30th. And the regular election that's already, scheduled would have the new mayor elect from the regular election July 1. So you have an acting mayor until one or the other. If we have a special election, we have a mayor serving who's been elected by area wide, that's going to serve until June 30th. And then the mayor who was elected at the regular election taking over. Or if you don't have the special election, you have the acting mayor serving until the whoever's elected at the regular election taking office.
Anything further,
So
Mr. Perez-Verdia?
I think I got it, and just one last clarification. So based on the legal the legal opinion, we do not have to hold a special election. That is the thing that there is nothing that requires us to hold a special election. We can choose to hold a special election or not. Is that correct?
Yes, that's how I read the charter.
Okay.
We don't have to have a special election. If we don't, we have to affiliate out the regular election.
Okay.
And I guess I would invite Ms. Vogel to also comment, I guess, to bolster my legal opinion there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Assemblymember Perez-Verdia, that's exactly how I read the charter as well. It directly gives the option of a regular or special election as the means of filling the vacancy. It doesn't say having acting mayor fills the vacancy. That's sort of a thing that happens while we're waiting for the next mayor to be elected, but it does not require a special election. And I have seen that reported in the media, but that's just not what the charter says. And it's also not what has been done in the only other time that there has been a vacancy, which has only happened once since we've been a municipality.
Great. One last question, Mr. Chair. Is that okay?
Sure, and then I want to move on.
Okay. So just a clarification in terms of who's eligible to run in the special election. Is there any difference in eligibility for people who run in the special election as opposed to the regular?
Through the chair, not that I'm aware of, but I will defer to other people who are also ready to speak.
Well, from my understanding, if I may.
Go ahead, Mr. Gates.
The qualifications to be mayor are the same, regardless of if it's special or regular election. The mayor's qualifications are set out in charter.
So the qualifications are the same in terms of the eligibility to run in a special as opposed to a regular. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Zolotel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this, either a special election or the regular election are likely to take place in the time of COVID, which we currently are in. I was wondering if the clerk could remind us of any particular challenges or considerations that happened in the last regular election that took place during COVID. I remember hearing some, but I need my memory refreshed because honestly, it feels like a lifetime ago. Thanks.
Meg, I think the biggest issues that we had for running an election during COVID concerned election workers who most of them are older and in a high risk group. And so we lost 95% of our poll workers, which was our issue. I think that we've learned a lot since then. And I think that it is possible that we would proceed on the same track that we did last April, which was in the height of the hunker down. And I think that we would be able to do a special and a special runoff if that is the will of the body, as well as the regular election in the pandemic.
Thanks, Barbara. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there's been, I think, a little bit of confusion in some conversations, at least that I've had with members of the public concerning the time frame. And I understand that it states not less than 90 days. However, is there anything that suggests or establishes a maximum number of days for action that's in the charter or the code? That's a question for the attorneys.
There is no maximum in code. You know, I think there'd be an argument that there wasn't a compliance with the charter if a regular election went by and it didn't, you know, and the mayoral seat wasn't put on for that election, but it just has a not sooner than time as opposed to not later than time, to look at other parallels to try to figure out what is a reasonable waiting time. I don't know that it's exactly in charter. You can see what the charter would do if this was a vacancy in the assembly seat. And there it would say special election if the next election is within 6 months of the vacancy. Is not within 6 months of the vacancy, and otherwise if the regular election is within 6 months, wait for the regular election. State law would draw a similar 6-month line, but again, that state law doesn't control where we do have the charter provision. So this is a decision for the assembly, and the April election is within 6 months of the vacancy.
Thank you, Ms. Vogel. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Gates, did you have a short addition?
Just a quick addition. I agree with what Ms. Vogel described, and nothing in charter or code. I would state, though, that we're looking at a mayoral term that ends June 30th, or with this regular election that's coming up. So we're not in a situation where we have a mayoral term that ends in 2 years or more than a year from now, where we really need to look at that outer limit. So, you know, the facts before us sort of don't pose that question to us.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I guess I would say that actually, if we do have a deadline, we do have a maximum number of days, and that would be the regular election, because that is in code, and we're going to at least have the regular election. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about precedents too, because it seems to me, well, there was a reference to a time when the mayor position was vacated before the term was up, so you might want to speak to that. And but anyway, give me the details. But I also know that I don't think we've ever had an assembly member's seat not be filled before an election. I know there was maybe some differences in the timing of that too, but I think we have some precedents that says that we have filled assembly seats. Well, no, I guess some of those have been appointed rather than actually appointed from the community, not from the other, you know, from another assembly member, which wouldn't be possible anyway. But anyway, so if we could just talk a little bit about what precedents we have, I'd appreciate that. Thanks.
Sure. And again, there isn't a ton, but Assemblymember Kennedy, the one time since we've had sort of the unified Anchorage, and we have our current, so the one time that's under sort of our current charter provision was when Mayor Begich was elected to the U.S. Senate, and there was a choice about when to have, I think there was a choice probably made about exactly which day the vacancy would be, and then they had a decision to make about how to fill that vacancy. And I'm just gonna call up the memo because I wrote down the days in that memo. Okay, so Mark Begich resigned on January 2009, and then the chair of the assembly, Matt Clayman, took office. That was 94 days before the next regular election. So that meant that if he'd resigned later, if he'd waited, he might have run into a kind of impossibility in the charter of being too close to the regular election for that election to count as filling the vacancy. So presumably the choice of January 3rd made sure that the regular election was at least 90 days away. They didn't hold a special election. Obviously, if they had held a special election, it would have been within days of the regular election, and that presumably wouldn't have been very clear for the public. And then the choice that they made in that case was to fill the vacancy at that regular election, but not actually seat the successor mayor until the normal date provided in code, which is normally July 1. I think in that year it happened to be July 2nd.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Vogel. Yeah, and I'm familiar with that incident. I thought we were talking about one where there were several months. I mean, we're not talking a couple of days here. We're talking several months. So I was thinking that maybe we had something that referenced a period of time where, we're looking at 8 months here before a new mayor would be in position. So that's definitely a lot more than 4 days. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, and just to be clear, so Matt Kleeman did serve from January until did serve as acting mayor many, many months, but his vacancy, or the vacancy in the mayoral seat, was a few days more than 90 days away from the election. So it was 94 days before the next regular election.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so looking at the presentation that Barbara gave us, the regular runoff election would be certified near the end of May. And so we could potentially seat a new mayor or have a swearing in ceremony around the 1st of June, which would be a month earlier than the current code. And so we would have to make an amendment to the current code to do that. And so I'm just thinking that particular situation makes sense to me. Just wondering how anyone else, what anyone else feels about that. Thanks.
Thanks. And I just want to make sure that we have the right information here. So, Madam Clerk, can you please clarify when we decided to go with a special, when the winner of that would be seated? And you're on mute if you're trying to speak.
Mr. Chair, I'm sharing the slide again. If you did a special and there was a runoff, and you can see that the certification would be on the 16th, March 16th, the new mayor would be, in my opinion, seated on March 16th. If it was part of the regular election, then it appears to me that the certification as currently scheduled would be May 25th. And then you would have to have a code change to seat the new mayor before July 1st.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. So we'll go ahead, move on, and then if any members, as they are in the queue, want to respond to Mr. Peterson's query, feel free to. Ms. Allard?
Thank you, Chairman. So my question is, and I apologize, I'm driving back from school with the girls. My question, they're not in the car. My question is, so there's going to be a vacancy for Assemblywoman Quinn Davidson's district, which means that district, and this is my most concern, is that seat for her.
There's no vacancy.
Will be vacant.
Apologies about that. Please continue, Ms. Allard.
What's that?
You cut off for a little bit, so and it's I'm getting notes that it's a little hard to hear you. So if you could try to speak up a little bit.
I apologize. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, we can. If you could go ahead and
Okay, I'm
just
sorry.
start over, that'd be great.
Okay. So Amy Demboski, my main concern is the seat as assembly person seat will be vacant for such a long time. That's a very long time to not have representation. And I know when Ms. Demboski had vacated her seat, that Gretchen Wimhoff was then appointed by the assembly. And my concern is that can there be? I'm worried about there being legal ramifications. And is it possible that although she's vacating her seat as acting mayor, when I say she, Assemblywoman Quinn Davidson, is it possible that we as a body or a city come forward and say, okay, we still need representation for her district? Do we then run a race for that assembly seat, or do we as the assembly come forward and appoint somebody for that seat in that district so that that seat still has representation? It concerns me that they won't. I've been inundated by phone calls, text messages, and emails about this question. And if you could maybe give more clarification to it, that would be great. For the attorneys, I suppose that would be directed to the attorneys.
Well, should I field that, Ms. Vogel?
Yeah.
So I actually had this question from another member yesterday and answered it. And basically, the way the charter is worded is the chair of the assembly assumes the role of acting mayor. But then we also have charter that says how a vacancy is created, 7.01A, and it has a list. And vacancies in elected office, so it applies to any elected office. And becoming acting mayor is not on that list, and becoming acting mayor is not a resignation. So technically, it doesn't create a vacancy in that seat. It's sort of a temporary absence or unavailability because the chair is performing as acting mayor. And then we have a charter commentary from the Charter Commission, the framers of our charter, and I'm going to read what it says that actually also bolsters this. And it says about that paragraph 7.02 C, where it says the chairman, well, it says this paragraph provides for ascension of the chairman of the assembly to the position of acting mayor during the vacancy in the office of mayor. It is intended that the acting mayor cease to function as an assemblyman during his tenure as acting mayor. However, when the office of mayor is filled by the election, the acting mayor reverts to his status as chairman of the assembly in all respects, unquote. And I apologize, I'm reading verbatim where it says his, so this should be understood as being gender neutral, but generally that means that Ms. Quinn Davidson, when she becomes acting mayor and the seat is not vacant after a mayor is elected, a special or regular election, and then takes office, Ms. Quinn Davidson returns to chair of the assembly in all respects and to her functions as an assembly member. And during that period where she performs as acting mayor, it's true that she's unavailable and unable to function as an assembly member representing District 3, West Anchorage. So District 3 will only have one vote on the body. The assembly body will only have up to 10 votes during that time that she's performing as acting mayor. During that time she's acting mayor, she does have the veto power. So I understand that people might be saying that's not an ideal situation or it shouldn't be that way. But that's what our law and our charter requires.
Chair, can I do a quick follow-up?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Dean, is it in there somewhere that, and I understand that, I respect that, obviously, because that's what's in the charter. Is there anywhere that maybe there's a temporary position so that when Assemblywoman Quinn Davidson has completed her acting mayor role, that when she does return back to her seat, that in the meantime, we have a temporary person in there, and then that person then moves out of the seat, and then Quinn take that back? Quinn Davidson, I apologize.
I've looked and I don't see any provision allowing for that. That would be an appointment, and again, it's not a vacancy, so there's no provision for an appointment for this period that she's acting mayor.
Thank you, Dean. I appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. All right, so moving on, I am in the queue next. So going off of Miss Allard's questions and concerns, which I totally understand. I wouldn't want to be in that position myself. So there's a little bit of precedent here. Can someone talk about what happened when, at the time, it was Harriet Drummond and Matt Clayman who were representing West Anchorage? What happened when Matt Clayman stepped up to be acting mayor? Was that seat basically empty until Matt Clayman stopped being acting mayor?
Through the chair, to the extent that that question is to legal, I believe so, but I haven't actually looked at that. I guess I assumed that that was the case because that there isn't a provision for appointing someone into that vacancy, but maybe someone who was in the municipality that wants to speak to it.
Mr. Gates?
Well, I was working in the Department of Law at that time. Unfortunately, I don't know, I don't recall, but I also have the same assumption as Ms. Vogel. However, we could verify what occurred. I could look at some minutes during that time between, for the assembly meetings, January 3rd, 2009 through June 2009. But I believe we will find, and I can report back, I guess.
Yeah, that'd be great. Just from my perspective, I've talked to neighbors, and so that is what happened back then, but it would be helpful to have an official response and not just me saying I talked to neighbors. So a couple more questions and then a comment. Ms. Jones, are you ready to talk about that now, or are you saying you can report on that later?
Mr. Chair, I can find the link to that info. I believe it's on the website, and I'll just put it in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so a couple more questions and then a comment. So first is, can you tell me who else reviewed the legal memo that was put forward, which frankly was really well done. I appreciate it. So either Mr. Gates, Ms. Vogel, one of you two.
Oh, well, are
Yeah.
you, I'm sorry, I was looking at something, but who else looked at the legal memo was the question? And
yes, who else reviewed the memo?
Mrs. Vogel. We had a Deputy Municipal Attorney D. Ennis also looked, and we had our election consultant, I believe Mr. Wheeler looked. And Ms. Vogel, do you recall who else? Was there one other person?
I know we had discussions with Ms. Jones, obviously, and I've certainly chatted with other members, assistant municipal attorneys at various stages of this, of preparing the memo. So I don't know that I'd be able to give an accurate recounting of exactly which assistant municipal attorneys looked at it once it was drafted, but it has been a topic of conversation among several of us.
Got it. So just last question, and then I'll comment, and then we'll move on. So just to clarify, so when you say Mr. Wheeler, is that Dennis Wheeler, who used to serve as municipal attorney for Mayor Dan Sullivan?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so then comment. Just to respond to Mr. Peterson's thoughts, because he asked a question of the body. So from my perspective, it makes no sense at all for us to do 4 elections in 5 months, besides being extremely confusing and for the public and complicated for the clerk's office to pull off. I think it's also just doesn't fiscally make sense. And that last part, the fiscal responsibility piece, is actually, that's what my constituents are reaching out to me about. They don't want a special election because of the cost associated with it. But more specifically answering Mr. Peterson's question on should we seat the mayor sooner rather than later, having had sort of a first hand view of the transition period that a mayor has, I think whoever is elected in April and then likely in the runoff in May should have the certainty and reliability of a transition period. And I think, especially in the time of COVID, I think that transition period is going to be more important than ever. But those are my thoughts, and I'm curious to hear from others. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Weddleton.
All right, thanks. So I want to follow up on that a little bit. And again, from where Pete jumps off, and I get some different dates than it sounded like Pete had. You know, if there were a special election and the person who won, and I assume that there'd be a runoff because we've got so many candidates, that would be March 16th. And if we were to let it go to, the July 1 to be seated, that would be 3.5 months. If we were to move the date where the winner of the regular election were seated earlier, say by the end of April, that would mean that the winner of this special election would only have 6 weeks as mayor. So in either case, whether it's 6 weeks or 3.5 months, the winner of the special election, they're a mayor, and they would come in and do what mayors do and probably seat new people and change staffing and all that kind of stuff for a very short time. And then potentially someone else comes in, unless that person also wins a regular election, and do it again. And that, I think, would create chaos for the city and certainly in that city hall. And I just wonder if there's a benefit in that. So I think that speaks against a special election, besides the points that have been made prior. As far as letting I think it is important to give a mayor, the time for the transition. I was there when Mayor Berquist did it, and I thought it was a really interesting process and it seemed like it would be helpful. On the other hand, I think because of COVID, we need someone in there who's got the kind of moral authority of being elected to the position. I assume that we'll still have issues with COVID all through next spring. And, we need someone in there who's got that authority and speaks as an elected person, elected to the mayor position. So my sense is we should seat a mayor elected at the regular election, seat them sooner than July 1. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 3 quick thoughts. One, to answer Mr. Peterson's question, I agree with Mr. Rivera and I agree with Mr. Weddleton in terms of the timing. And if we think about when that new special election mayor would come on, it would fall right in the middle of first quarter budget revisions and setting the mill rate and a lot of things that as a new member, you probably remember the learning curve to be quite steep on. It's one of the first things you do after that April election. So just wanted to add that context to that kind of timing. So I think that's concerning. On the considerations about West Anchorage representation, just remind everyone, we do have a 1-person district with Mr. Constant downtown. And then I'll say from my own experience with Mr. Rivera, having been chair most of my tenure on the assembly, we work really well together, and he's there, but it's not quite as much as if he's not chair. And so it's possible and it's doable. And I have full faith that West Anchorage won't have any representation issues, and that members, of course, all work collaboratively and together to help out other members as needed. So I would fully expect that to continue. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh, you caught me with a bite of lunch. Sorry. I think I'm obviously going to be a little bit more of a different perspective on this. And I think the reasoning behind what we're doing in terms of putting an interim mayor in there is basically it's a last ditch effort. It's the idea of, oh my gosh, things are not working as they are supposed to be. So we've got to put someone in there to hold down the fort, so to speak. And it's really just that it's a interim measure. It's kind of a bit of a stopgap. It's not ideal. And it's certainly not what the public believes is responsible in terms of allowing them to exercise their vote to choose their elected, their governing officials. So really, it's not the Assembly's job to appoint a mayor, and essentially that's what we're doing for the time being. But we should be basically allowing the public to fulfill their responsibility of electing a mayor. So I don't see how we can deny that opportunity for them. There was kind of a comment about the accountability for the mayor's position right now in terms of dealing with some of the things that we're up against. That's all the more reason to have somebody that has the confidence of the community, the full community, not just a few comments from this person or that person, or, none of us, I'm pretty sure, has done any kind of a survey amongst their entire constituency that really gets a true sense. We've had a few phone calls, we've certainly had some emails, but I think the only way to answer that question is to have a special election. And the one thing that I think affords us some advantage is the fact that we do a mail-in ballot. We don't have to staff all the polls. We don't have to have people in place during COVID. We have to have some, and obviously we did that in our regular election in April. We're doing it, just in terms of helping out Juneau with their election. We're still running election processes in the election center. So I'm pretty confident that we can pull off the elections as we need to. But for me, I know there are people who want this job. I'm pretty sure Austin Quinn Davidson never ran for the Assembly in hopes that she'd someday end up having to be mayor if our mayor decided to resign or needed to resign or whatever. But I think it's very important that we basically allow the community to decide. There are people right now who want the job, and they are willing to put their name on a line and have their name on a ballot and go through whatever campaigning they do or don't want to do. But that way we can try to build back some of the credibility that I think this group has lost. And I think that it is too much of a volatile situation right now in our community, that we do need somebody who is prepared for this kind of a task. And believe me, there are people out there who believe that they really are. And I think the community needs the opportunity to make that decision. So the interesting thing, just in talking to somebody statistically, from a statistics perspective, they believe that whoever wins the special election, if there were to have one, and if it needed a runoff, they would have a very high percentage of also winning the general election, the regular election. So I don't think there's too much to be concerned about in terms of, well, what if we have, a totally different person? It's certainly possible, but it's not very probable. So I think we have to go on with the special election because there is an expectation that at some point after that 90-day period, you either have a special election or a regular election. Well, if the regular election is too far out, then the next option is actually the special election that you would have within, a few days of that 90-day period. I think the other thing to consider is we don't have to be married to the first Tuesday of any month because we do these mail-in elections. We can have a deadline of a Friday or a Monday or whatever because people aren't going to the polls on election day. Election day is really just for our purposes here in the municipality. Election day is simply the date by which your envelope has to be stamped by the post office or has to have been dropped in one of the election boxes, one of the ballot boxes. So we're not really held to, just this idea that, well, we have to do it by the first Tuesday of March or whatever. We have certain other time frames that are like 63 days out. You have to have your ballots set by the candidates who are putting in their name or filing to run, but we can work through those dates. So anyway, I think all of this is doable. I think it absolutely. I don't think money should be the one thing that keeps people from exercising their civic duty. I think that we actually have to, in order to provide a little more accountability and integrity in some of our processes, we need to have the special election. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, so we're probably going to go a little bit past our notice time of 1 o'clock, which is fine, but I want to make sure we hear from folks. Madam Clerk, can you just do a brief synopsis of the item that you put in the chat, please? Ms. Jones?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I can try and share it with you if you'd like.
Whichever is easiest.
So it's not current, but here it shows the West Anchorage seat, which is, I think, what you were asking about, correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
And then I'm going to scroll down just a little bit so you can see the rest of it. It looks a little too big. And there you can see what happened with Matt Clayman and Harriet Drummond.
Just for the record, can you verbalize it, please?
It shows that Matt Clayman was elected on April 3rd of 2007. In the note, it shows that he was acting mayor from January 30th, 2009 until, I wonder if that should have been 3rd, given Kate Vogel's memo, until July 1st, 2009, due to Mayor Begich being elected to the Senate. And it doesn't show that anyone else was appointed to that seat. That column on the left is the Matt Clayman seat. And then the seat on the right is Harriet Drummond's seat. It shows that she was elected on April 5th, 2011, that she resigned in January of 2013 because she was elected to state Senate. It shows underneath her that Cheryl Frasca was appointed to Ms. Drummond's seat on January 15th of 2013. She ran for election but was defeated. And then you can see that Tim Steele took that seat on April 1st of 2013.
Great, thank you. So next I have Miss Allard.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back to reemphasize a little bit. I'm not sure what, maybe I kind of feel like there's a little bit of pushback of having that representation out in West Anchorage. And I'm going to go back to the charter when they reflected that the 90 days, people were more interested that it was not to be less than 90 days for a special election. And I interpreted it as the intent was that the seat for the assembly seat for West Anchorage, because it doesn't belong to a person, it belongs to the district, that seat, the reason they did it that way was the intent of acting mayor not to be absent from that seat for a substantial amount of time. So if we temporarily appoint somebody, granted that Mr. Constant's district, he does that district on his own, it's half the population and half the size. So even though we would help and possibly chime in and listen to those assembly meetings and community council meetings and help that district out, the bottom line is we aren't the elected officials that sit in that seat for that district. And I just really want to go back to, for me, the deciding factor is if we don't appoint somebody in that district, in West Anchorage's district seat temporarily, while Austin Quinn Davidson is out of it as acting mayor, then what is that saying about us as a body? What is the pushback? Or not just, oh, well, we'll help. What is the real reason why any of you guys, if you can explain, that would be great. Why wouldn't we want that district to have representation full representation during that time? That's a lot. 50,000 plus people in one district for one assembly member to do. And the people who are taxpayers in that district deserve the best. And if it's only temporary and we appoint someone temporary, shouldn't be an issue with it. So if anybody wants to chime in on why they feel that that district doesn't and shouldn't deserve or have representation, why Austin Quinn Davidson's out, I would love to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Mr. Gates, you wanted to weigh in on this?
I'm sorry, I was
Yes,
more
thank you,
looking
Mr.
back
Chair.
from assembly versus the attorney.
Go ahead, Mr. Gates.
Okay,
If you have any legal advice, go ahead.
Comment. The only pushback is because it's a legal reason. So whatever policy reason you think that there should be somebody appointed and so forth, the legal reason is that appointment is a legal process and the charter does not provide for this appointment. I was going to show you the charter sections and so forth, but you wanted to hear from the assembly members, so I'll turn it over to them.
Thanks. I'm just going to go down the queue, so if anyone wants to comment, please add yourself in the queue. Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, first I'll comment on...
Mr. Perez-Verdia, you're coming in very staticky, so I don't know what's going on there.
Okay, how about now?
That's better, yes.
Okay. Well, first I'll comment on the special election, and then I'll make a comment responding to Member Allard. You know, I am leaning towards having a special election, even though it feels like it is costly and it is potentially confusing to the public. I feel like that that in the previous case with Matt Clayman, that the timing of it made it such that it was not feasible. There seems to be significantly more time in this case, and it seems to be the intent of the charter. And so by us interpreting it differently and trying to sort of do things that are save us money and save confusion are all well and good. But it feels to me that the intent is that as a few members have already said, that the chair moving into the temporary mayor position is intended to be as temporary as possible, and that the intent is for the assembly to move towards filling that seat through an election. So that's where I'm leaning in that area. And then in terms of West Anchorage, yes, certainly it is a large district, and we have already heard from one of our community councils who have asked the question as to whether somebody could be appointed. I heard from another group earlier today. There is a significant amount of concern around making sure that I am able to fully represent that district as a single member, which is challenging. So I guess the question that I am left with, and this can be certainly responded to offline, if the assembly wanted to step into trying to appoint someone, what would that take? What would that entail? What would that require? So that's a question I'll leave hanging that I don't necessarily need a response to right now, but I would like to get a response offline. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Vogel, if you want to briefly summarize your comment, please.
Through the chair, I didn't have a comment right now.
You did put one in the chat, and I want to make sure it's on the record.
Thank you. Sorry. Getting back to what the honor roll showed about the West Anchorage Assembly seat, it did seem to have a typo. If you look at the same website portion talking about the terms for mayors, it does show that Matt Clayman was acting mayor from the 3rd of January 2009 until the 1st of July 2009 and not the 30th.
Thank you for that clarification. Mr. Weddleton.
All right, thanks. So Cameron's more patient than me because I'd like to know, could a code change allow a temporary assembly person to be appointed for West Anchorage?
Which one of our attorneys would like to respond? Go ahead, Mr. Gates. You unmuted yourself.
Should we fight over it? Okay. Well, the code right now says to determine vacancies, see the charter. And the charter is kind of linear and says an elective office becomes vacant if the incumbent, and then it's got the list. So it's not, I mean, I don't think a code change would do the trick, but, you know, I say that with sort of like 75% certainty. So I could look at it closer, but I don't think that just a code change would be sufficient. So I think that you need a charter change, as Ms. Vogel suggested. And the charter change requires, you know, a ballot proposition to amend it.
Could I follow up briefly?
Sure.
Okay, so Dean, we have a position for a youth member who can't vote but can sit up there and basically participate in any other aspect. Is that something, or how would we be able to do a non-voting representative for West Anchorage?
Well, that's an interesting question. But remember, the youth representative, they don't represent anybody. They are, I guess you could say, they represent the Youth Advisory Commission. They don't take any action. They don't have any weight other than, I guess, being able to say something during discussion. Whether we could do the same, I don't really feel prepared to answer if we could do the same for West Anchorage.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and just read these next two comments into the record, and then I'm likely going to close off this work session. So first comment is from Mr. Peterson. He believes it would take a charter change to fill the West Anchorage seat temporarily. So it's from Mr. Peterson. And then from Ms. LaFrance, a question. Is there any guidance on when a mayor elected in a special election would take office, i.e. transition time? And I believe Ms. Jones actually responded to this. In Ms. Jones's opinion, they would take office right after the certification of the election. Is that an accurate representation, Ms. Jones?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that is my opinion.
Thank you. And we also have a concurrence from Assembly Council Dean Gates. Okay, so with that, we're going to go ahead and end this work session. Thanks, everyone.